So I'm just going to introduce our three panelists now. So thank you all for joining. It's really amazing to have such an experienced and interesting panel. We're joined by Ela Stapley from the International Women's Media Foundation. Ela is a digital safety advisor working internationally to support journalists with their digital security needs. She works with the IWMF as lead consultant on their online harassment initiative, where she manages and shapes the projects that focus on bolstering the security of women journalists online. She is also the founder and director of Siskin Labs, a consulting firm that works with the media and non-profit organizations to find practical ways to increase their digital safety. Also joining us, we have María Paolo Martinez from Flip. María is a political scientist and with a specialization and master's degree in journalism from the Universidad de los Andes. At the same university, she is a professor of digital narratives at the CIPA Center for Journalism Studies. She was director of communications at the Ministry of Culture in both 2018 and 2019. And finally, very excitingly, we have got a special guest. Marilù Mastrogiovanni is an Italian journalist with a wealth of experience in investigative reporting and countering discrimination against women journalists. In 2016, she conceived and directed the Forum of Mediterranean Women Journalists, an international event dedicated to investigative journalism. She collaborates with Ossigino per l'Informazione and with RSF. Recently, she was nominated by the Secretary General of UNESCO as president of the jury of the Guillermo Cano International Journalism Award. So as you can see, you're a very experienced and illustrious panel. So I'm going to head on to speak to Ela now, because it'd be really great to get a bit of understanding as to why we're here, why women journalists in particular are facing threats, and what the context is globally. Hand over to you.
Thanks, Jeanette, for the introduction. It's really nice to be here today to speak to you on International Women's Day about the threats facing women journalists around the world. So I primarily deal with issues around online abuse, although women journalists are facing a range of threats, both online and offline, including sexual harassment and assault. And that can include also within the workplace, within the newsroom itself. When it comes to online abuse, what we are seeing with the birth of social media over the past 10 years is this increase in online abuse. We know that online abuse disproportionately targets women. There's a report by the Web Foundation found that 52% of young women had received abuse online. And not only does it target women, it also targets women of colour, people of colour, people from the LGBTQ+ community. So if you are, if you are a member of those communities, or if you are, a journalist, a woman journalist of colour, your online abuse, the level of online abuse directed against you is going to be much higher. And we also know that traditionally it was certain beats that journalists covered that would attract more abuse online. I think over the past 4 to 5 years, we've really seen a change in that. So where it was before, it was kind of government corruption, or covering, crime, you may get harassment online. Now we're seeing journalists who are being targeted for writing, music reviews or about sport, for example. So online abuse has become much more widespread, and gone are the days where it was kind of one person maybe attacking you from their basement, which is the kind of traditional idea of this troll, this harasser. Now what we're looking at really is very organized, very systematic campaigns directed against journalists in the attempt to change the narrative, and also to smear these journalists and also media outlets. So these are very sophisticated campaigns. Quite often they are government backed or backed by supporters of governments. Or by very well organized people on the internet, such as the far right, for example. So what we are seeing is these targeted attacks are really having an impact on the way that women journalists are able to do their job. We note, and we have heard from journalists that self-censorship is becoming an issue, that they no longer feel comfortable reporting on certain issues, that they know if they're going to do said story that there's going to be a massive backlash online. And what we're also seeing is an interest now in media outlets to try and protect those women journalists and also other journalists in their newsroom from this online abuse. So what was previously seen as kind of a women's issue, I think, is now much more taken much more seriously. And there are newsrooms that are taking steps to better protect their journalists with, you know, good practice policies, as well as you know, technical support for them as well, in order to better you know, look after the journalists online and the work that they are doing. So really what we are seeing is that these are quite old tactics to be using against journalists, you know, this kind of smearing the reputation. Oh, you know, this journalist is aligned with this government, or they're a spy, or this is quite an old, you know, kind of old-fashioned, old-school technique used against journalists to try and shut them down. And what we're seeing now is that has moved online, which means, and a journalist once said to me, you know, that it's terrifying, because now that smear campaign travels really fast, it crosses borders, and it has a massive impact on the way that they can do their job.
And in terms of, you've said that self-censorship is an issue. Are there particular areas where that is most acute? So what are the topics that women journalists are fearful of writing about?
I don't think there's actually, not to my knowledge, any research that's been done on self-censorship and whether, you know, what journalists are doing and what they're not doing when it comes to actual self-censorship. I'm just going on, I work many cases of journalists every week. Many of those are online abuse related. But we do know that certain topics do attract a backlash online. So, you know, anything to do with race, anything to do with gender equality, the Me Too movement, anything to do with certain political parties, anything to do with there are particular groups online that are more active than others as well. So we have seen, you know, that anything to do with kind of identity, gender identity, for example, that there has been, you know, if the journalists are covering topics along those lines, there needs to be, you know, best practice in place to better protect them from, you know, any particular attacks that could come their way online. So, you know, and these attacks aren't just coming from the right, they're also coming from the left when it comes to politics. So before it was very easy to say, but I think in today's world it is much more difficult. I think under the Trump administration we did see a massive uptick in online abuse in the United States, but that model was kind of copied around the world. We see that in Brazil with Bolsonaro, for example, where, you know, people speaking out against environmental issues, for example, get more attacks online. So kind of any attacks that are any stories that are revealing truths that you know, groups of people want to keep quiet. So that could be governments, it could be multinationals, it could be organized crime. This is when you see these online abuse tactics being used. They're weaponized really online, and we do see online attacks tend to predate kind of physical attacks. So quite often journalists who've suffered a physical attack will have had a number of online attacks previous to that, and it's resulted in a physical attack. So what they do, you know, that what happens online is a reflection of society, which is quite sad given the current state of online harassment. And it also, depending on where you live in the world, people have different ideas about what online abuse is. So, you know, there hasn't been a real clear definition of what it is. And, you know, women journalists often tend to be not represented at higher levels of management in newsrooms, and it may be that they don't feel comfortable coming forward and speaking about this. So there is a conversation change going on. There are resources being developed, and there are kind of better definitions for what online abuse is, so that journalists can recognize that, you know, this is their place of work, online is their place of work, and it's not okay for them to be harassed in their place of work. So, you know, there is this blurring of lines as well in journalism between the private life of a journalist and their work life, and that is because journalists are often using their social media sites to reach out to audiences, to look for sources. You know, they're using Facebook Messenger to reach out to sources. They've got an Instagram which has photos of their family and friends, as well as, you know, pictures of their work. There's a real blurring of the lines more difficult to protect them when it comes to digital safety. And so more awareness in newsrooms is really needed for that, and clearer guidance about, you know, what is okay to be putting on your social media. Is it okay to be reaching out to, you know, members of the far right using your personal cell phone, for example? You know, or reaching out to them via Twitter. These kind of policies and best practice can really help better protect journalists around the world.
Thanks so much, Ela. And it's really interesting there that you sort of allude to this blurring of professional and private life, and then also that the onus maybe is on the newsrooms to make sure that they are keeping the journalists that work for them safe. And I think this is actually a really good time to pass over to Maria now, because Maria's recently been working on a case with El Colombiano, which is a really quite important regional newspaper in Colombia. And I wonder, can you talk us a little bit through the case, Maria?
Yes, of course, and thank you for the invitation. I'm going to go through very quickly. On 2019, a journalist called Vanessa Restrepo was victim of sexual abuse by one of her colleagues, also journalist, Juan Esteban Vázquez. And at El Colombiano, as you said, is a traditional printed newspaper that circulates in Medellin, which is one of the most important cities in the country. So she filed a complaint for sexual abuse, and after 3 months, she had to continue sharing the workspace with him and suffering the denial of request for special measures to protect her rights. So she ended up resigning, and after hearing several times that since the events had not taken place during working hours or in the media facilities, so they do not have the margin of action, and they were waiting, the media company, for the resolution of the legal process that she had filed against him. So she resigns at the newspaper, and she come asking for help, and Flip and other organizations help her, so the court could review her case. So 3 years later, her case was reviewed by the Constitutional Court, which is the highest court in Colombia, and ruled in his favor, which is the sentence 140 of 2021, and established that the newspaper did fail to comply with his duties to prevent, investigate, and punish the violence of which she was victim, and that they do not have a clear, fast, reliable support route with a differential and gender approach, which prevent all workers from enjoying a decent and safe workplace without re-victimization, which she suffered during those months she stayed at the newspaper. So it's a kind of a historical decision that made clear a differential approach, that's saying that violence against women cannot be equated with other types of violence, that from now on, all the media should understand how they measure sexual harassment and other ways of workplace harassments, and they cannot neglect the process because it did not happen within working hours or working places. The court forced the newspapers to reinstate her or pay the salaries that she stopped receiving from their resignation, and they gave the company 1 month to adopt a new protocol that provides clear and effective routes for prevention, care, and support. And due to the sentence, which is for us the most important matter, all the Colombian media are called to review their protocols to identify if they take into account the differential risks that women journalists have, because the court made it clear all the context and the inequality. If they have both for internal with media colleagues and also for external with sources or other people that that journalists work with, that there can be no difference, neutrality, or tolerance towards any conduct of gender-based violence against women or LGBTQ plus community. The court also included them. They cannot insist on equal treatment for two employees, a man and a woman, perpetrator and victim, in the context of a sexual abuse case, which the media insisted during those months. And the protocol that is meant to be created, it has to have a perspective of protecting victims and include or to reinforce of the protection for women's rights. So they need to create the protocol and also to include all the workers and make these workshops so they can understand, every person in the media can understand what the changes is going to be now on. The court also included a perspective of freedom of expression that understands the participation of women in media to increase the participation, which is now unequal, as a way to materialize gender equality and strengthen democracy. So it recognizes that journalism continue to be a scene of discrimination, where there is also a tendency to sexual and physical aggression, and that might end up being not only very violent for women, but also a way of indirect censorship. And just for ending, all the media has to create this protocol, and they have to socialize them to make clear the routes and take action on the basic concepts of gender, human rights, freedom of expression with male and female workers. This is not only for women. It's not only a matter that concerns only fellow journalists, but also all the employees, including, for example, the people that work on human resources offices, which will be the people in charge of dealing with the complaints of this violence. And now we are kind of giving this support and advisor to the media that now are going to create these new protocols due to the sentence I just explained.
Yeah, it's a really amazing judgment, isn't it, really? So, and do you think that this judgment will have wider ramifications for newsrooms in Colombia? For example, do you think that that they will realize that they have more responsibility for their journalists?
Yes, no doubt. I think that the sentence make it clear. It's a really large and very complex, and it describes in a really, really good way how the inequalities, journalism, and the gender perspective should be implemented. And I think it is going to change for next cases. We hope not, but if they occur, it's going to be the sentence that is going to apply and the context, and also as a prevention for or making the newsroom more secure places, because newsrooms are now, after this sentence that the Colombiano paid in money and end up recognizing what they did, all other media has now the not only the sentence but the need, during this wave of gender and women rights expressions, they have the need to follow, and they have now the sentence is like a step-to-step route to do it.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Thank you so much for talking us through that, because I think it is a really interesting case. And I wonder now if we can go to you, Marilù, to talk a little bit about your experience as a journalist and the threats that you've faced, and maybe as well sort of give us a bit of an insight into the Italian context. Oh, you're still on mute. Marilù, you're still on mute.
Sorry.
No problem.
Thank you for the invitation. And I will focus my speech on the threats to women journalists as expression of gender-based violence, and on the need for this type of gender-based violence to be recognized also at the judicial level in Italy, in Europe, in the world, so that female journalists can have justice and compensation for damage. I will talk about my personal experience, and I will broaden the analysis to the national context, also making some proposal, if I can. First of all, I want to say that what happened to me happens to a lot of women journalists in Italy. It also happened to Daphne Caruana Galizia in Malta. She too has been subject of offensive caricatures that dehumanize her. She has been muddied in the social media, and she also suffered the incendiary attack. The Maltese colleagues told us about that during the Forum of Mediterranean Women Journalists that I founded 7 years ago, and that is a free space to enhance the talents of women journalists and denounce discrimination, sexism, gender threats, even online. Because in the threats toward women journalists, there is always a gender specificity that has to do with the female body, the desire to annihilate it, subdue it, dominate it. Women are always questioned professionally, starting from their gender. At the forum, we hear from the lively voices of colleagues that this happens in all culture, in all countries. And this is the patriarchal culture, like the mafia culture, that crosses all cultures, that of annihilating and subjugating women as women. This year, thanks to GMDF, Global Media Defense Fund of UNESCO, together with Ossigeno per l'Informazione, Oxygen for Information, the Forum of Mediterranean Women Journalists will try to monitor gender-based threats and then to change the patriarchal culture, which is at the base of the threats, by changing the language, pushing the newspapers to use gender language. But we need more funds because we can't analyze all the threats against women journalists. And you know, the first rule of journalism is if you don't talk about it, doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. The dynamics I have described to you are the same all across Europe. It's an European emergency. In Europe, Ossigeno per l'Informazione is the only independent observatory that conducts direct, continuous monitoring based on fact-checking of the threats made to journalists, women too, bloggers and other information operators to intimidate them because of their activities and to limit freedom of the press and free expression. But Oxygen monitored threats are just the tip of the iceberg. This for two reasons: because a larger part of threats is not reported and because of the observatory has very limited resources and is able to patrol only a portion of the field of observation. Due to the scientific methodology it uses and the ability to detect episodes never reported by the media, Ossigeno per l'Informazione data is also casting light on what happens in other European countries. This activity is well known to representative for freedom of the media in this office, which over the past 10 years has repeatedly used Ossigeno's documentation to request explanation from the Italian government. But please, let's look at the data. According to Oxygen for Information, last year, 384 journalists were threatened. 105 were women, 27% are women. Do you remember the rule of journalism? If you don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. Well, the Italian Observatory of Threatened Journalists of the Ministry of Domestic Affairs published its data. 156 cases in 1 month. just 156. Instead, according to platform to promote the protection and safety of journalists of the Council of Europe, there were just 201 treats in Europe, of which just 11 in Italy. Yeah, 11. In this way, treats disappear. Treats to journalists are not a big problem, and the phenomenon of gender-based violence toward women journalists disappears completely. In this way, the problem of threats to journalists and the phenomenon of gender-based violence towards women journalists is successfully solved. Well, now, if I can, 5 minutes, I'd like to talk about raw lawsuits. Please tell me if I can.
Of course, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Raw lawsuits that are a growing phenomenon because just the specter of a claim for damages is enough to paralyze many journalists. The so-called chilling effect, you know. According to the Ministry of Justice data, Italian Ministry of Justice data, analyzed by the Association Ossigeno per l'Informazione, 90% of the libel lawsuits filed did not end up going to trial. That means that they were frivolous and that they were made with the intention of gauging journalists and forcing them to bow down, not to write, not to delve deeper. Nevertheless, a mistake can cost you dearly, and that can mean prison in Italy. Every year in Italy, about 150 journalists are convicted. Threats toward journalists and even criminal convictions are on the increase. While Parliament could discuss the numerous legislative proposals to eliminate prison for opinion crimes and stem the intimidating lawsuits, it doesn't do so. In fact, statistics show that they are politicians themselves who bring about the more rash lawsuit. So a law that would increase the level of democracy in Italy doesn't suit our rulers. It isn't convenient for politicians to have a free journalists. I have received in my working life at least 100 raw lawsuits and no convictions. I faced a criminal trial which lasted 11 years and I was acquitted at the request of the public prosecutor. Acquitted because everything I had reported was true. I had to defend to myself at great personal costs, while those who sued me did not pay anything. Threatening journalists doesn't cost nothing, it's free. So from their point of view, it's worth it. For this reason, I am among the first of the signatories to a request sent to the President of the Italian Republic to change the law, curb rash lawsuits, and eliminate prison for journalists. The proposal is called Io non sto zitta, that means I won't be quiet. But my problem, like that of many other colleagues, is that even if we are precarious, it's better say freelance, not precarious, we refuse to bend. For me, journalism is either ethical or it's not journalism. 3 years ago, a big holding company asked me to pay 200,000 euros within 15 days or they would have sued me. In Italy, you can do this. It costs nothing, so they do it. This happened after I had written the holding company was giving work to mafiosi in the waste sector. They sued me, several lawsuits filed in various public prosecutor offices. They requested the seizure of my newspaper. The seizure of a newspaper in Italy is prohibited by the Constitutional Charter. Yet a judge went ahead and seized the newspaper for 45 days. Then the holding company's activity was suspended by the state because after my journalistic inquiry, after my report, because that holding was considered to be related to the mafia. But I was sent to a summary trial like a murderer caught in the act with the blood-stained hands. Then I was acquitted. But I suffered several threats. I could tell you about when I found my dog beaten to death in my garden. I could tell you about the night when someone set fire to the back of my house while my family and my children were sleeping. Moments of pure terror. I could tell you about when a mafioso came to the office, my newsroom, to tell me that his only goal in life was to follow me and take pictures in order to record everything I was doing. I received online threats too. You know that according a research of UNESCO, in the world, 73% of women journalists received online threats. Well, threats I received are about a politician, the elected representative of my town, wrote on Facebook on the that he would come and get me. At the time, I had published an investigation on how a boss of a local mafia, the mafia of the south of Italy called Sacra Corona Unita, laundered drug money through apparently clean companies. That politician was the right-hand man of the boss of this clan and was elected in the major's party. I had evidences and I brought them. He threatened me by saying, "Slut, tell me where you are. I'm coming to get you." Because don't forget, a journalist, every woman, free woman, is every empowered woman is first and foremost always a slut. The police arrived to protect me, but on Facebook, the boss's friends continued their onslaught. When the boss was killed, shot by Kalashnikov rifles, his friends on Facebook called him a lion, a hero, and me an infamous slut. They posted these comments on the Facebook page of the mayor on my town, but he did not see fit to remove them. It seems he was also happy to allow posters on walls of my town, claiming that I was muddying the good name of our town and asking citizens to react against me. And then my house in the night was fired. He didn't ask them to react against the mafia, but against the journalists who denounced mafia. Then the major selection committee posted other posters depicting me buried in a pit and other tweets online. 2 years ago, I received 2 email bombing attacks. In a few seconds, I received 4,000 emails on the email of the newsroom of Il Tacco d'Italia, my newspaper, with the phrases, "Death is coming," and "you have to be quiet, infamous." And infamous for the mafia is a person who has betrayed them, who speaks, who is not part of the mafia organization, which for them is the real state. Infamous people have to be eliminated. So in Italy, 21 journalists are under police protection because of the threats of mafia. I had to move 250 kilometers away from my home after someone set fire to it at night. fire it at night, as I told. And I want to say that I feel a lucky person. I know that many of you wonder why I say this, but I feel a lucky person because I own my destiny. I have no masters. I have founded my little publishing house. I founded my newspaper more or less 20 years ago. I founded the Forum of Mediterranean Women Journalists to help other investigative women journalists to raise their head, and I can decide in conscience to go on. We are a cooperative of journalists. We are the owner of our newspaper, and of course, with huge efforts and with great fear, because I am afraid, I'm so afraid, but this doesn't prevent me from continuing to do my job to the fullest. This is what courage is, to go on despite the fear. Don't believe those who say that they have no fear. We need fear in order to be cautious and careful.
Thank you so much, Marilù. That was, I mean, I think I'm not alone in saying that it's really incredible to hear those stories, and we can all imagine how frightening that must have been, and the courage that it does take to continue reporting. And certainly you're not alone. I think that we've seen over the past few years a lot of very courageous women journalists. You've got Maria Reza, Claudia Duque in Colombia, Jeanette Bedoya in Colombia. So, you know, you're in good company with people who are shining light on the areas that need to be exposed. I'm wondering now if we can almost move to slightly more positive side, where we can talk about the resources available to support women journalists. So today, on the International Women's Day, the Coalition Against Online Violence has launched a new campaign to basically give support to women journalists around the world, and it's #SaferOnline. So they will be sharing a newsletter. There'll be video reels and explainers with tips on digital safety. There'll be different resources available to women journalists. And I know that obviously IWMF does similar really good work with producing resources for women journalists. So I wonder, Ela, can I get you to talk a little bit about the resources available and the tools that there are to support women journalists?
Yeah, this is a topic that's been of great interest to the IWMF over the past years, these last 2 years that I've been with them. And I've been working on the online abuse project. So we started off initially making, we identified that courses were, you know, something that was lacking that would be really useful for journalists, women journalists primarily, around the world, that would explain to them, you know, what is online abuse, who is attacking you, and why are they doing it, and what are the tactics that they are using in order to attack you. With that, we did a partnership with Free Press Unlimited, who's also a member of the coalition, and Greenhost. They have a platform called Totem, which has online learning platform courses, which are self-paced, and we have created 2 courses on there, which I really recommend people go out and have a look at. One of them is called Know Your Trolls. The other one is called Keep It Private, and this one really explains to journalists, you know, this I mentioned before, this blurring of the lines between private and personal life. You know, what data is best kept private and why. So at the end of those courses, they will have a much better understanding of that. Those courses are in English, French, Spanish, and also Arabic, and they've been contextualized as well. So they're not just translated; they're really adapted to the regions that we made them for. So we've also got a massive online learning course which focuses on online abuse, and that course was put together with 4 experts who focused on different areas of digital safety and online abuse, with really good practical tips there for journalists and women journalists in particular on how to stay safer online. And also it's really important to mention freelancers, and Marilù mentioned that, you know, they often don't have the support of a newsroom So, you know, these self-paced courses can be really useful and helpful for them. With the project, as well as the courses, we also offer individual assistance support to women journalists facing online abuse. So there is that option as well. And we've recently started working with newsrooms on policy creation and best practice to really help newsrooms understand what digital safety, what online abuse is, and the different areas that means that they have to create better protection for, and that includes digital safety. Online abuse isn't really just a digital safety issue, it's also a mental health problem. You know, it's also, you know, social media best practice. It's also about escalation processes within the newsroom. You know, so if someone, you know, we mentioned, you know, if you are receiving, you know, how many was it, 4,000 emails with, you know, death is coming for you, who do you go to report that, and what happens next? So having those processes in place is really important in order to better protect journalists within the newsroom, but also the freelancers. It's really important for newsrooms to consider them as well. Further with our work in newsrooms last year with the Thomson Reuters Foundation, UNESCO, we created a series of guides. One of them was a guide for online abuse. We focused this globally for women journalists around the world, but also gender safety policies for newsrooms, including a checklist. So that also included physical safety as well as digital safety and the issue of kind of sexual harassment, both in and outside the workplace. So women journalists, we know, maybe we mentioned it, that the violence that they receive, both online and offline, often has a gender component to it. So it's often about, you know, women's bodies. It's often about the way they look. It's often about, you know, what the types of threats they receive, and not only death threats, but they often have sexual graphic content related to them. And it often involves their family, including, you know, they threaten their children, and that tends to happen more often as well. And then finally, you mentioned the Coalition Against Online Violence, and to give a really big shout out to that. We were over the past, you know, from last year, we have been working with some wonderful organisations, including your organisation, on the Coalition Against Online Violence. So we are over 50 organisations working together to really bring change when it comes to online abuse and tackling the issues around online abuse. And that includes, you know, promoting newsroom safety. It includes, you know, conversations with tech platforms about how they can better protect themselves, how they can better protect people on their platforms, including journalists, and kind of helping them understand that, you know, journalists aren't using Facebook for, you know, or Twitter for personal use. They're using it for work. And so if you were, you know, in an office giving a presentation, or, you know, presenting your latest documentary, you wouldn't expect someone in that office to stand up and be like, hey, you look hot in that outfit. You know, that type of comment is, you know, the day-to-day what journalists have referred to as kind of the equivalent of catcalling in the street. You know, this drip, drip, drip of sexual harassment on platforms. You know, something really needs to be done to address that. So the coalition, we're an organisation, we're a coalition of 50 organisations from different backgrounds. So some are tech backgrounds, some are freedom of expression backgrounds, some are media outlets themselves, working together and trying to find a solution to better protect women journalists online when it comes to online abuse. And last year we also created the Online Violence Response Hub. So this is a one-stop shop for all things online abuse related. So we've currently got, throughout the month of March, it's focused on newsroom safety. We've got a lot of great resources on there for newsrooms, and these resources have been developed by members of the coalition who are specialised in newsroom safety. And so we have great resources on there, and there are several ways to access those resources. So they can search for those resources through the search function on the site, but there's also a pathway, so you can click through. So you can go through, like, I am a newsroom, click, and you click through and it says, you know, I'm interested in media policies. You click there and then it kind of lays them all out for you, and it kind of holds your hand as you walk through it. And it's not just for newsrooms, there's also for journalists there as well, and also for people who want to help journalists. So it could be family members, or, you know, organisations that maybe don't support journalists, but, you know, are interested in learning more about online abuse as well. We also have latest up-to-date research and information, and you can follow us. We're also on Twitter, and we will share all those details with you in an email, I imagine, at the end of the webinar. Is that how that's going to go, Jeanette?
We will indeed, yes. We'll consolidate all of that, yes, so we can send you out an email for all of your all the attendees and all of the people who couldn't make it but were registered, and then we'll make it a one-stop shop for all of those amazing resources. Thank you so much for that. So I think as well, what's really important from us at Media Defence is that we really do want to encourage women journalists who maybe have been victims of these threats, who've been targeted, as we've heard, like Marilù, by slaps, or who have faced gendered violence, that we really appreciate that. Obviously it can be very difficult to come forward with these issues, but we want to be here to support you. So if you or any of your colleagues have encountered these threats, then please do apply to us for support. We provide both financial and legal support to journalists under threat, and in the cases where women have experienced gendered violence, we will pursue basically an effective investigation into those offences, and we will seek to prosecute where appropriate. So there are options available for you, and we really do want to be there to support you. And Maria, Paula from Flip, I think that's a similar situation there, where should you be in Colombia, then there is support available. And I wonder, Maria, could you maybe talk us through some of the types of cases that you would support as well, to maybe give people a better understanding of the sorts of challenges that you can support them with?
Yes, of course. Now, actually, we also are supporting women that ask the court to review also the case for online harassment and online threats. So we are giving the advisor and support them. We also have, last year, we celebrate the case of Jeanette Bedoya, which you mentioned. And actually today we are going to be with Jeanette on an event, Women's Day. And since that court decision also, well, now we have a great job to do, which is to create this journalism foundation due to that court decision, and which Jeanette is going to be leading, and is going to be especially for women that are victims of gender-based violence, included journalists. So we are now kind of imagining the new challenges we're going to face, not only because all the violence have also changed due to social media and but also because with the Jeanette case, there's a new path to build, to strengthen all the advisor and all the flip work. And regarding this sentence, we created with another NGO that supports the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, which is a German NGO. We created also guidelines, a guide to understand the sentence, so the media could have a more simple way, like 1, 2, 3, the key points of the sentence, so they could start building these new protocols. And we are also giving them the advisor and what they need to create them.
Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing work that you do. It's really helpful. Thank you. So just a quick reminder that if you do have any questions, you can pop them down in the Q&A function at the bottom. And just, I don't know who best, maybe Ela actually would be the best person to address this to, but something I've often wondered about is, do we see any, also to what extent do we think that women journalists are often targeted by these tactics as a way to sort of test out a tactic before it's then applied to a wider population? Do we see any evidence of that?
There has been evidence of that, but not necessarily directed against women journalists. So as far as I'm aware, there has been cases where I'm thinking especially in terms of disinformation campaigns and misinformation campaigns being carried out as kind of a test run in one country, and then, you know, this strategy is weaponized and used against other countries. So, but as far as I'm aware, not specifically in kind of against women journalists. But as I mentioned before, and as Marilù pointed out, you know, women journalists are disproportionately targeted online, and that the nature of that online abuse is very different. So, you know, the language is very gender, you know, it's very to do with, you know, their bodies. It's very misogynistic in tone. That's often accompanied with racism and homophobia. So, you know, something needs to be done. I'm not sure, you know, how far away we are from things being done, but I do feel there is a bit of a conversation changing, happening globally.
Yes, definitely. And I suppose one thing that would be really useful, again, is often funding, isn't it? Often these initiatives, you've got a lot of organisations that are doing amazing work in tackling this, and so any funding that we can get that's sort of specific to protecting women from online violence, or sort of empowering women to just report more safely, that's really valuable initiatives. So we haven't had any more questions through from the Q&A, so I think in which case we can wrap up there. But I do just want to remind everyone that a recording of this webinar will be available on our website, and we will send out the link as well via email. Equally, we will consolidate all of those amazing resources and tools and links to those organisations that we've discussed today, and they will be sent out to all of the attendees too, so you won't have to look yourself to try and find them all again. And I want to thank everyone here, all the panelists. You've been really amazing, and it's been really insightful to hear from you and to hear your stories. And thank you to all the attendees for coming along, and we're grateful for your support in protecting women journalists and making sure that they can report safely and that their voices are heard. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you. Bye.